exploration that I have made and will be continuing to make. When I was asked the question, when I first started working as a retiree for NRCS, one of the questions I was asked was, how can NRCS plant more trees in urban areas? And after talking to a few people, I kind of narrowed that down to how can NRCS support agroforestry through EQIP in urban areas? Work. Did that work? No. Let's see.
Point it at the computer.
Ah, wait. Which button do I push? Sorry.
The worn out forward.
Oh,
You don't need to left click for you. I can stand over there and left click if you can
oh,
see.
yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Clint. Thank you. Okay, so what I'm going to do. Okay, although. Oh, it is working now. Yep, or rather, I'm working now. Okay. All right, thank you. So I'm going to present just a quick overview of a few things I learned when I did kind of a broad exploration to answer that question. Then I'm going to present 3 urban agroforestry profiles and then do a little summary. So, and I think you all know EQIP is Environmental Quality Incentive Program. Right. So what I did to answer this question, I reached out to a bunch of people in USDA. I've listed some of the agencies there, as well as people in universities and nonprofits that have worked in urban agroforestry. And I asked them kind of different questions, but wanted to get an idea of, well, what is their perception of urban agroforestry? What are the challenges that they see in general in urban agroforestry? And what challenges do they see related to EQIP? I wrote a 20-page report, which will be available to all of you electronically at some point. I think Donna will make it available. And I'm just giving you a little tidbit from that. But one of the things I learned is that the Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovation at NRCS has done kind of an assessment to see how many of all the practices, all the EQIP practices, how many acres and how many practices have been established in what the census calls urbanized areas. And so I pulled out the agroforestry practices, and you can see there are some of each agroforestry practices, not thousands, but hundreds and hundreds of acres. And in the case of riparian forest buffers, 13,000 acres. To date. What you'll soon learn is that EQIP has supported urban agroforestry in other ways, not just by supporting these practices. So that was a big lesson for me. Some of the challenges that people talked about are challenges for urban agriculture in general, not necessarily just urban agroforestry. One is the awareness of people living in urban or suburban areas of NRCS and EQIP and how to apply for practices. The application process, I was told mixed things. For some people, it can be daunting, hard to understand. For other people, not that difficult. FSA, getting an FSA farm number. One person said it only took me 15 minutes to get one. Other people had different experiences. Getting a forest plan for a small property can be difficult because it's hard to find a technical service provider that will provide a plan for a really small property. On the other hand, one NRCS staff member in Connecticut told me that some agroforestry systems that she's worked on have been, the plan has been a conservation plan that helped initiate those. So things can work a lot of different ways, as I'm learning. And a lot of it is very state dependent. The low payment schedule scenarios, so the amount of funding, financial assistance that a landowner could get for a practice in an urban area often wasn't worth the time to go through the process, but those payment schedule scenarios have been changed at the national level, and states are adopting some of them. And Clint knows a lot more detail about this than I do, but so that they are paying more for smaller amounts of land. So other challenges that I heard are really challenges that you would find. Can you see? Yeah, you can see. Okay. With agroforestry in general, not necessarily just urban areas, you know, planting trees. If you want to see benefits from those trees, you have to wait a while. You need larger spaces, larger timeframes. We don't know enough, don't have enough technical knowledge on managing trees or agroforestry systems. I mean, a lot of people don't have that knowledge, even though it exists. And there's some other challenges that you can see. Many people are unfamiliar with the benefits of agroforestry or trees, so why would they try to plant a tree? Another last challenge, which I won't go into in too much detail, is that our EQIP can support non-industrial private forest land. Not just any forest land, non-industrial private forest land. And Clint would know more about the details of this too, but if you look in the Farm Bill, NIPF land is defined as rural. And so in some states, they're interpreting this to mean that they cannot support EQIP agroforestry practices in urban areas. Other states are interpreting that differently. It just depends. I made a bunch of recommendations. Some of them had to do with communication, not that that's going to solve all the problems, but a lot could be, more if NRCS is providing more, or NRCS or USDA can provide additional communication on what are the benefits of integrating trees into urban agriculture, technical information, etc. The one that I suggested that I focus on following up on was providing real life examples. A lot of people were like, I don't have any examples of urban agroforestry. So that's what I sought to do. And I'm going to provide you 3 of the 7 profiles, or give you rundowns of 3 of the 7 profiles that I've done so far. And I contacted these landowners by reaching out to some of the people that I contacted in the very beginning for this assessment. Here's one of my favorites. Actually, they're all my favorite. James Robinson grew up in Akron, Ohio, and he says he had the fortune to be able to play in the woods when he was growing up. And he wants other kids to be able to have that ability. And so he actually researched, he used some data to find a plot of land in an underserved, low-income neighborhood in Akron. He bought an abandoned lot in a neighborhood, 3-acre lot, and he started managing the existing forest, pulling out, he said, trees that weren't useful or were dying or dead. He had to clear a lot of trash out of the lot, took a lot of effort to do that. He also planted trees, and you can see the species there on an 8x8 grid. And he planted golden seal along the border of the existing forest. So he's got a forest farm. He might not have called it a forest farm, but that's basically what I would call it. He received NRC, and just, by the way, I did not say I'm only looking for people that got assistance from NRCS with these profiles, but most of them had received some kind of assistance. And in his case, he is receiving a conservation stewardship program payment of $2,800 a year for 5 years to maintain the trees that he planted. It was interesting to learn where else people had gotten assistance. He also got assistance from Rural Action, which is an organization that I believe focuses more on larger properties in the Appalachians, but they were willing to work with him and help support him. They found they found a forester that could make a forest plan for him. They also provided training and whole farm planning and mentoring. He, as other people I spoke with, spent a lot of time looking on the internet for groups to join, training to get. He took training, several classes through Cornell. And he's gotten a lot of information from the Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmers website. How am I doing on time, by the way?
You're okay, it's 9:01, you've got like 15 minutes.
Okay, great. So his biggest challenge, some of his biggest challenges were understanding NRCS programs. How, you know, especially the application process, that was hard for him. And also finding a technical service provider, but then he got help from Rural Action. His advice for other producers is urban reforestation is really expensive. You really, really have to, when you undertake something like this, spend a lot of time making contacts with people that can help you and provide you advice and ideally financial assistance as well. Okay, so now we're moving to California. Coastal Roots Farm is a farm, 20 acres, was purchased in the suburban area of Encinitas, California, by a foundation who had this goal of preserving farmland in an urbanizing area. And they went through a whole visioning process to figure out what to do with the land. And based on this visioning process, which reflected, you know, their goals, which included integrating sustainable agriculture, food justice, and ancient Jewish wisdom, they decided to allocate 8 acres to alley cropping and silvopasture, which I thought was really cool. So they created a swale and berm system. They planted trees on the berms, and the swales are actually a rotational system with poultry, cover crops, and vegetable production. And they got NRCS assistance also. They got EQIP financial assistance. They said for erosion control and mulching. They also received approval for an application for hedgerows and another for high tunnels, but because of some internal issues, we're not able to move ahead with those. But you'll notice neither of the two people I've just profiled got requested assistance for an agroforestry practice. It was for more supplementary practices, which I thought was really interesting. The challenges they have were the cost of tree planting and the maintenance. They're all mostly volunteer. There are like 5 paid staff, the rest are volunteers. So it's a lot of work to find volunteers to do all the work that needs to be done. They would have liked to have more technical assistance and advice on irrigation and species selection. I don't know who they reached out to, I don't know. They would love to have a tool for estimating potential carbon benefits for such a small piece of land. They weren't able to find that when I last spoke with them. Okay, now we're going to Maryland. Valeria Francis. I guess I'm providing 4 examples, not 3. I got rid of one of them though. She is actually a USDA employee, so I met her through USDA. She bought a piece of land in a suburb of Maryland that included 1.5 acres of forest. And after she'd been there a couple of years, started going through the forest and figuring out how she could make it better for people and wildlife. And so she cleared out a bunch of invasives. She started kind of enhancing the growth of existing native plants, especially those that were producing food for people and animals. Then she started planting native plants, and you can see some of the ones she planted in the list there. And she received quite a bit of assistance from NRCS. Of course, she had, more knowledge, right? She knew how to reach out. She got several technical assistance visits. She got EQIP financial assistance for doing her forest management plan. For wood chips, which she later didn't need assistance for because she was a lot of people get wood chips through landscaping companies for free. And she's going to establish a hoop house. She just got permission for that. And the hoop house will be for producing native shrubs and trees because she had trouble finding those. So she wants to provide a source for others. She, like James, spent a lot of time doing research on the web, reaching out to different groups. She became a member of some of these groups listed here, did certified naturalist training so she could really understand her forest and how she could enhance it. Her challenges have to do with equipment, like how can she harvest her wild persimmon? She can't reach the fruit. She looked for a long time for a way to more easily move mulch around because she, like other people with these similar kinds of properties, spend a lot of time moving mulch around. But she finally found a lawnmower. Somebody had converted a lawnmower into a small front loader. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Finding a forestry TSP was a challenge, but she did find one. Last but not least, this was a contact that Jim Allen helped me make. The Food Forest Cooperative in South Phoenix, Arizona. South Phoenix is basically a food desert. There's a huge, I think it's a 20-acre or so parcel called Spaces of Opportunity, where that's subdivided and people are doing urban gardening in this. And then this one the Food Forest Cooperative was able to secure a parcel of 1 1/4 acre, and they are managing that as a food forest. So it's still in the growing process. They also are managing the land for flood irrigation, so there's a lot of people managing for water use or water retention. So they have a flood irrigation system. They're planting plants that are indigenous to their cultures and as well as indigenous to the local area. And you can see the list there. They didn't know about NRCS until recently. Another gardener received assistance from NRCS, so they're going to be learning more about that. Lots of information sources. Alexis Treviso is the person I talked to. She had created a food forest in her yard and learned a lot through that. Also going online, looking at YouTube, talking to other producers. Let's see, I've listed some of the challenges there. One of its big challenges is leasing rather than owning, because they have an 8-year lease that will run out in 3 years, and they're trying to work the system so that they can continue using the land, which is owned by the school system. Her advice was to anyone is nurture your curiosity, really follow what your passion is and your curiosity when you're establishing a garden or a food forest or whatever. So a few profile takeaways. All of the NRCS financial assistance, as I've mentioned, was for complementary practices, which I thought was really interesting as opposed to an agroforestry practice. People really relied on the networks that they formed and online classes and in-person classes. A lot of common components of the 7 systems that I looked at were mulching, using, manipulating the land so that they could retain water or get rid of water, depending on where they were in the tropics or dry area. Most people had wildlife and human goals intertwined. That was important, doing something for the conservation as well as for people. Food justice and security, food security was important to a lot of these folks. And I thought I was I meant to delete that last part because I can't really talk very knowledgeably about that, but some people have gotten conservation plans, some people have gotten forest plans, and I can't really explain in detail, but.
Sure, yeah, I mean, your comment earlier about the rural aspect of the definition of non-industrial private forest lands, I see why there would be a question about if it's a conservation plan or if it's a forest.
Right, whether it should be one or the other. Okay, so I just want to say thank you. I'm giving you a couple websites. I don't know if you can copy them down or what, but and there might be easier ways to get there. But anybody who is new to urban agriculture, wanting to start any kind of urban agriculture effort or forest farm or whatever in their property, you can go to the Beginning Farmer and Rancher website or link and find out who the coordinator is for your state. That was recommended to me as a go-to. And then also, if you want to find your local service center, USDA Service Center, you can go to this site. And I wanted to point out also that Jim and Andy have written a really great paper, Urban Food Forests in the American Southwest, and that would be also something to look at.
So Susan, I do have a copy of the Urban Food Forest by James Allen.
Great.
Mason over the corner by the water. And if you want to sign it on the back, your email, I can send you a copy of it also. And also the paper she's talking about, I do have a sign up sheet for that if you'd like a copy of her paper that she put together for this presentation. And I'll be asking all the presenters if we can use PDF version for their PowerPoint to do it.
Great. I'm guessing I'm out of time.
That was impeccable timing, Susan, and a great segue. She mentioned just the value of networks and partnerships, and reading the title of our next speaker's talk. I think we're going to hear a little bit about that with respect to urban agriculture. So I would like to introduce my new friend, soon to be mentor and neighbor up in Wheat Ridge, since I live in Lakewood, YY Dennis. She is the garden coordinator for the city of Wheat Ridge. She is joining us this morning because her colleague Susan Bennett wasn't able to come, and we are just so happy that you were willing to pinch it. So come on down.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. My name is YY. I go by YY. My given name is Kristen, but it's spelled with 2 Y's, so hopefully you can figure that out. So I've been invited here to cover for Susan, who is out for a family emergency. So I guess it's a stroke of misfortune for me. But I am really happy to be here and speak with you about support communities and our Wheat Ridge, Regenerate Wheat Ridge partnership. Right.
Oh, great. So point it at the computer and what, this goes back and that one goes forward.
So when I was asked to jump in on this, Susan had already started the presentation, but I kind of picked up where she left off. And the first thing I started to do was to search out some of our guidelines and urban agriculture zoning things that make it possible for Wheat Ridge to be, I like to consider it a hub of urban agriculture. So yeah, just like insect, zoning regulations can be both a threat and an asset to urban agriculture. Wheat Ridge regulations allow homeowners to do all sorts of agriculture activities, from just basically our zoning agreements and having animals. So any zone, I'll go on to this. So this is our shape of Wheat Ridge. And then this is our residential zoning and urban agriculture guide. So we have a really nice guide that was created by a couple of our city council people, a couple of people on the Jefferson County Conservation District. So yeah, so community gardens, urban farms, urban gardens and farmers markets are produce stands are allowed in any zone district. Hoop houses under 400 square feet are exempt from building permits. Non-commercial greenhouses are allowed as an accessory structure, and they must follow setbacks. So those are kind of some lenient zoning permits that I believe help urban agriculture really take root. In addition to that, composting is explicitly permitted. So that was a big change for our city council. Recently just met and explicitly permit composting. They also developed a partnership with Scraps, which is a short haul composting partner. So we have 2 drop-off places, and you residents can buy subscriptions for that, and they have 24/7 access to compost deposit sites. That's for food scraps only. And also we are allowed to have all sorts of animals, goats, ducks, chickens, chinchillas, anyway. And there's a really weird, I wanted to include it, but it was kind of weird kind of, let's say, how do you call it, an algorithm or something like that? It was like 1 horse equals 2 goats that equals 15 chickens or something like that. So depending on the size of property that you have, it will dictate the kind of animals that you can have. But small farm animals are allowed pretty much in any zone. So that's really cool. That's kind of our starting place. Beyond that, I believe really what supports an agriculture project or program is the people behind it. So on the side over here, those are two of our city council members and a member from the Jefferson Conservation District. And a very avid volunteer, Kathleen Martel. She's in our cultural commission. She's involved in everything. So these guys are very actively involved in agriculture. Amanda Weaver, the woman in the back in the hat, she has goats, and we sub with her. She has her goats graze on some of our open space land. They actually come to our community garden at the end of the year. So we have a really nice partnership with her. She's a city council member, so of course she's pushing agricultural initiatives, policies often. On the other side, this is Susan. She's the one I'm subbing in for. She's my colleague. And Brandon, he's our special projects coordinator, both big advocates of nature conservation and agriculture. So Brandon's always looking for grants and ways that we can bring in funding to support our agricultural program. So these two people got together, these two groups people got together and wanted to see what more Wheat Ridge could do to support urban agriculture and created Regenerate Wheat Ridge. They had two driving questions. One was, can we increase access to farmable land in the city of Wheat Ridge? And the other one was, can we promote community-based regenerative agriculture education? Basically, that second question is their interest. So the first one, what we decided to do is to try to look at, and this is before, I should mention that I had been living in Costa Rica the last 10 years. I just came back to Wheat Ridge and I jumped into this project kind of already on the way. When I jumped in June of last year, the grant funding had just expired. So a lot of the stuff was ending and I was coming in to begin something new. So what they had decided to do is to cultivate some innovative land partnerships for local production. What does that even mean, right? What does that look like? So that looked like bringing together landowners, producers, and agency partners and facilitating a bunch of listening groups and finding the barriers, what was happening. The city's idea was to try to play matchmaker. So they used some GIS info to find out where were these land pieces that were accessible. Maybe they were not being used. Maybe they were being, underutilized pieces of land within Wheat Ridge that possibly could be farmed. Out of that came this technical assistance guide. So this is a 2-page or a booklet that outlines kind of how to go about creating partnerships between landowners and farmers. Some of the difficult questions about land use, water rights, access to land, long-term vision. Lots of things are involved when creating partnerships. So this starts to hack away at some of those questions. So some of the successes, we did get one partnership created. I can talk about that. That's kind of an ongoing evolution. With some very interesting pieces involved. So yeah, we did create one partnership. There's a very supportive landowner. It was between a farmer and a church. So the concept works. And also two businesses, this is kind of a side project that happened. Two businesses launched, agriculture businesses launched as a result of the roundtable conversations. So that's kind of interesting. And also kind of simultaneously, we had a farmers market evolve. That's a no fee for farmers to enter at a business in Wheat Ridge. So that was kind of cool because that came out of the assessment of what was a barrier to farmers getting their food to market. Some of our challenges, yeah, there's still limited land availability, even when you're trying to put together creative partnerships. There's limited obvious win-wins. Like sometimes we thought like, oh, they were like a flower gardener and they're a florist. Don't you think they would get together? Not always very obvious when people have different long-term visions on what they're trying to create. There's a lot of variables to consider. Yeah, mutual trust is essential. And then the city, we have like a very limited role in how it goes about like maintaining a relationship. So it was kind of a precarious position to start the conversations and start kind of being like, Susan would call it like kind of like a matchmaker. It was kind of like putting ourselves out there and then like being like, well, what actually are we doing out here as a city? So I think that there's some other really interesting ways to support regenerative agriculture. Oh,
Right up here.
Oh.
I'm trying to get this thing off the top thing.
If you click the bottom bar. Yep. Oh.
Yeah, it literally-
Thank you. I'm getting reports from back home.
So could we increase access to farmable land in the city of Wheat Ridge? Yeah. Sure. We did form one partnership. The lesson being learned in that, and like I said, is kind of ongoing. Establishing partnerships can be challenging. We created a resource guide, which is addressing the barriers and the challenges. So the farmer is a good friend of mine that is in this partnership. And we were sitting down and talking yesterday, so I would be prepared to give some, and he was like, there's so many nuances that are involved. So the grant funded ending in June. That's mid-season, right, for a farmer. So he took on this new plot of land that he couldn't actually garden yet because it was turf, right? So he had to then transition this, but the grant funding covered infrastructure, but not labor. So we get into all these really interesting things about like, how are we supporting farmers? And once land access is given, there's a lot of things that come in with that and how to maintain stewardship. Where are the nuances and the intricacies? So I just think that's a really interesting conversation to keep going. It's not just about land access to farmers. Working capital is really important. And seasonality. So on the other question.
I broke it. Here, take that and I will. Or not.
We're sorry. So the other question, can we promote community-based regenerative agriculture education? More or less, is there an interest? So this is Happiness Gardens. One of the other things that the Regenerate Wheat Ridge did in their attempt to increase land access is divide Happiness Gardens. So these front plots are community plots. They're 10 by 20, or in the section in here, this is an old picture, are 10 by 10 plots. These are community plots. It used to be all community plots. And in the olden days, Happiness Gardens has been there for 50 years, I'll say that. So let's say 5 years ago, it was dwindling with ambition. And there weren't many gardeners in there. There were like 5 people kind of holding strong and being in there. So in the city's attempt to increase access, we went in there and said, okay, you guys get the community garden in the front, and we're going to turn this back into market plots. We invited in as many market farmers as we could find to take those plots on. John, the partnership that has with the church I was speaking about, has these little kind of, it's almost like an eighth of an acre, and then another market farmer has these 2 on the ends. So these lands were a bit fallow when John took them on. And again, going back to the seasonality and really supporting the transition of fallow land into rich agricultural land takes time, effort, labor, time, did I say that? So he's working a model of trying to manage plots all over Denver. He's got one in his home, one at Happiness and the church, and starting to build another one. He's got partnerships with Go Farm, so he's bringing in interns and also offering training. So he's really looking creatively at how to solve some of these issues. This year was his first year that they took on a 30-person CSA. So now that's his focus, is getting those CSAs filled, right? And whatever he can find, very little time to turn fallow land into agricultural land, same thing. So he's really looking back to the city and saying, since this was like a bit fallow, you know, like where's the support from the city to really turn it over, enrich it, and manage it in a way that can be agricultural? So that was an interesting conversation to have yesterday. So that's a little bit of the background in Happiness Gardens. Another thing that we did was we got a grant from the Community First Foundation for this expansion area. And this was an abandoned right of way that one day was supposed to be a road called Leprechaun Lane, right outside Happiness. Come on, can't make this up. So this expansion area, pretty much is divided in half. Oh, I'll go on to that later. Let's go back to the education part. Sorry, getting ahead of myself. So regenerative agriculture education, Regenerate Wheat Ridge workshops. We do one a month, the second Wednesday or third Wednesday, it's tomorrow. About regenerative agriculture. Tomorrow we're teaching about the goats. Like I said, Amanda Weaver's got some goats. We're going to have an in-person experience. We take people into the goats. They go pet the goats, lots of goats. We also take people into our hives. We talk about native plants. We talk about soil. We have a native garden and pollinators. And then this is our friend in the back, right? I was telling you about John and his partner. They're actually teaching one of our regenerative showcases. So they're very active. Our community garden right now is so activated. It's amazing. People are really involved in teaching and sharing and really collaborating and working with one another. Our classes are one of the most attended in the Parks and Recs department. We get 25 to 30 people pretty regularly. And there's a side effect. So it's really nice. We're teaching these regenerative workshops there. And then the side effect, we get this really cool fruit tree orchard. We have all these really amazing partnerships with elementary schools, with a high school, and we got this native plant garden. So it's really kind of a win-win thing using the Happiness Gardens in the expansion area to really teach some of the classes out of that place. We also started doing a harvest festival as a way to engage people in the really fun part of growing food and connecting people with the farmers in Wheat Ridge. This year, we're planning on doing a farmers appreciation picnic. So we want to have the community come out and prepare food in a potluck fashion and invite the farmers out to enjoy a meal of their food prepared by somebody else. We also won an award for our Regenerate Wheat Ridge classes. So this is the CPRA Columbine Award last year for programming. So can we promote community-based regenerative agriculture education? Yeah, big time. We have a big demand for it. People are always asking questions. They want to know about more workshops. We have an explosion of people that want to be involved as stewards. The Harvest Festival. Yeah, so the Wheat Ridge, once, like I was mentioning, the conservation grant ended right when I got hired. So because of the popularity of the Regenerate workshop, Wheat Ridge workshops, they brought them in-house. So my position went from part-time to full-time, and even looking at how that position can expand now that I'm looking into program development and things like that. So yeah, so I manage the Happiness Gardens. I'm working to expand the community garden, events, lots of events. People love events around gardening, lots of partnerships. And we're looking at expanding other gardens into a historic spot. And yesterday we just started demolition on a house that will be maybe a regenerative Wheat Ridge hub. So back to the expansion, half of it, as I mentioned, was a Community First Foundation grant, and the other half is in partnership with Doug. I don't want to give out too much because I know Creighton is going to be speaking about that next. But this is an amazing community engagement place. So we started this native exhibit. This is the Wheat Ridge High Schoolers. Like I mentioned, it was an abandoned right of way. It had a split rail fence, and everybody around there just complained about the weeds and what was going on there. So we started by taking the fence out. We worked with a designer, and then we worked with the high school kids, and they drew the design onto the ground. They built the path. Then school got out. Had to find a new group of volunteers. But that's all right. Here comes the Happiness Gardens volunteers. And they started where the high school kids left off, with putting in builder sand and squeegee. We have a partner from the Denver Botanic Gardens, Holly Haynes. She's amazing. And then this woman here that's bending down and filling in, she just couldn't help herself. She wants to be our native plant steward. So now she's the steward of this section. She wants to promote it. She wants to be involved. We've talked about having propagation parties and all sorts of things. So like really bringing in more community involvement and engagement. This other picture down here on the bottom is Teresa. She's been gardening in the community garden. She was one of the ones that had a plot in the back that had to move forward, right? She still is very upset about that. She had like an asparagus plot back there, that was going. So it's like, it's really interesting when we start to interact with land management and land access and thinking like we're really opening up. Everything has like a fallout consequence, right? To keep being involved and aware. This is what our native plant garden looks like now. So the split rail is gone. Lots of plants going on in there. The next section over, we're doing a demonstration of straw bale gardening. This is what it looked like at the beginning. Kind of taking shape now. Beyond that, we're doing a demonstration of hugelkultur. Does people know about hugelkultur? Yep, great. So that's the start of it. It's been a bit of a coordination issue because I'm just the garden and, you know, I get it. But anyway, the city of Wheat Ridge has a bunch of wood debris. Most cities, I would imagine. So this was my attempt to show the city an alternative to just piling it, stockpiling it. Okay, so that's going on. That's what it looks like now. It's not much movement. We have put in a sunflower cove. You can see that it's coming out. And then this starts our food forest. So you can see this is what it looked like the day of the planting. And then this next picture is Miranda, and she's our food forest steward. And she's actually a volunteer of Doug. So that's a really interesting collaboration, but she's also a gardener in Happiness Gardens. So she's also very involved. They have just been planting that place up. It's amazing. And you can see down this corridor, here is a townhouse complex. Every single one of those neighbors out there in the morning, planting, pulling weeds, talking to the trees, interacting. Very interesting. Give you some backstory on that one day. So here's what it looks like now. It's kind of hard to tell, but all of the trees have leafed out. All around all the tree wells are plenty of plants. This is Miranda's attempt to shade some of the squash or cucumbers or something that she put in. And then in the back of Happiness Gardens, I was trying to capture the interesting thing that we're able to display there is we have an orchard. And this is planted in rows and lines and straight, right? So it's really interesting to be able to have that experience for people to see what the difference, a felt experience between what is a food forest and what is a typical orchard. Now, to be honest, I am integrating food and flowers and things in there all the time because we have an amazing bindweed explosion. So if anybody has any insight in that, open the talking. One of the other things that we're doing, and this is I believe really where Happiness Gardens and the Regenerate Wheat Ridge can expand their program is in the waste management and compost use. So these are the remnants of last year's leaf drop. We used a Johnson Sioux bioreactor method. Anybody wants to talk more about that, I can tell you, fill in on that. But this is low labor, long-term composting for leaves. So we had the city bring out all their leaves, and maybe you can tell this is like 3 foot, 4 foot high chicken wire. They were full, like over full. Now they're already like, I would say, a quarter of the way. So we'll be using that come fall, and then we'll be preparing those same digesters to receive more city leaves from the residents. We want to expand into doing our own compost and waste management on site there. There's our bees. Just a little shout out to Susan, because she's our apiary person. And then these are our other grows. So I was telling you about the house. This was a house that was like grandfathered in on a weird city park. So it has all sorts of weird constrictions and constraints on it. It just came down yesterday, and we're looking at putting in there like a regenerative hub. So maybe where our classes, our Regenerate Wheat Ridge classes can like move from the pavilion into a place with like power and water. And maybe we could do some things about like seed starting and really start some seeds and carry them forward and give those out as part of our plant giveaway. And then we also have had some requests from the Historic Society in the neighborhood to utilize the outdoor space at this Bauhaus property, which I think is a really interesting consideration for those people in municipalities that have historic lands. A good idea to start using them. So how Wheat Ridge Parks and Recreation supports regenerative agriculture. There are community gardens, there are forestry programs, horticulture, education, decisions. I think that's the biggest way that Parks and Recs can support agriculture is through the decisions that we make and how we utilize land. really opens it up to how other people can use it. We have really amazing partnership with the Sustainable Wheat Ridge. So these are neighborhoods that have organized themselves and want to do more sustainable practices. So it's just like I said, it's really robust in the support for agriculture in Wheat Ridge. And this is the last picture. These are some of our core members of the garden. And I put this picture in because this is our potluck that we had maybe a couple of weeks ago. I was in the parking lot trying to cancel it because of the severe storm warning. So this is what I want to share with you. When we combine agriculture and community, we get a bunch of dedicated volunteers. These people show up. They probably would have shielded their plants with their body to protect their plants from the hail, but they also show up for each other. And I think that is really where the bolstering and the support for agriculture and community agriculture comes from. It's activating the people that are involved. And that's me and Susan. So I welcome you to get in touch with us. If there's other ways that I can support you, or maybe we can receive more funding to do more agriculture in the city of Wheat Ridge. Super open.
Hey, Donna, since we have a little bit of time, do you want to do some Q&A with the two of them? Unless I'm hitting the under on. Have another like 3 minutes before we're supposed to go on break.
We can have a couple Q&As now, we just need to take another break. I was gonna say that there's just one bathroom here. And we are in the barn, you guys, so you can just get up and, you know, take care of business. And then there's also an outhouse outside. Okay, so, yeah, maybe that's what's on. If there's any questions, I can't tell from the, Amy, do we have questions from the?
I was gonna say, if you guys have Q&As, I'm gonna have to present or repeat the question for our Zoomers on.
Oh, cool. That's upside down, but. Cool. Does anybody have any questions for any of our presenters this morning? Susan, YY?
I had one for why you were asking, everybody knows what something is, and I thought, well, I don't know what it is. It was the recycling of the, where did you go?
Yeah.
The wood chips, and I think you were talking about mushrooms, or I'm not sure.
The Google.
Yeah.
Wood chunks. Tell us more about that. And then I had maybe a similar question, what you're using those leaves for.
Okay.
If we have to stand by or pick up the microphone. It's right in front of me.
Can I sit now?
You can stand right.
Okay, so the question was, what is hugelkultur? So hugelkultur is a permaculture practice that utilizes wood debris, old wood debris, and other organic yard debris, and it's built in a hill. That's what hugel means in German. So it's maybe like a 3 to 4 foot hill built. The bottom layers are large wood trunks, and then as the hill goes up, the debris gets smaller, and then it's kind of like iced with compost and plantable soil. The older the pile gets, the better the soil gets, and the less water you need to use. So like year 3, 4, and 5 are super low maintenance. Up to that, like first year or second year, it's kind of like cover crop and conditioning the soil. But then you utilize a lot more vertical space by using a hill method.
And just to add to that, we have a massive hugelkultur project here that you can show everyone tomorrow.
I'm sure they didn't hear that.
Oh, what's your name?
I'm Josie.
Josie said that there's a hugelkultur demonstration here that we can visit tomorrow. Creighton, did you have something to add?
Well, I was just because I've been there at that agriculture second. I'm curious about the one here at the Botanic Gardens. Traditionally, they're in mounds. You guys have dug it down, which I think makes sense in our climate. Like, is it actually like excavated? Did you use like a city earth mover and a resource to get it down to keep on water?
Yeah, so we did. So the question was, so Creighton's been out to our site and he saw that we dug down about a foot. We did that for a couple different reasons. One, when the irrigation guy was out there, he had a heavy machine, so we could do it. The second was that land was very low and he didn't want to leave a big gap between the sidewalk and where that expansion area was. So we talked about strategically digging those beds out and using that soil to bring up the level of the native plant exhibit. But also it's a great way that you can put more wood in. And I believe like the origin of the hugel bed started because this guy had access to really big tractors and had a ton of wood and was like, what do I do with all this stuff? Let's get it together. He dug out like an acre or something huge, put all that wood in and then like planted it and like noticed after a period of time, like didn't have to take care of it anymore. So I think that's kind of like the method. You don't have to dig under the ground. You can just lay it on top and start going from there. But we had the access to it. The other question Dana asked was about what were we going to use the leaf digesters for. So leaf mold is great for seed inoculant. It also is a great way to mulch or use mulch or top dress beds. It's a good way to add nutrients. So leaves are really full of minerals, and as they break down, they really give those nutrients back to the earth. I think it's really fungal dominant. So it's a good way to get a lot of those fungal microbes back into the soil.
So I have a question about, I was just curious, when they're bringing in all the leaves, is there any concern about bringing in some kind of like seeds from invasive species that could also germinate in those areas, or do you have to do anything?
Yeah, so that's why we do the slow, like those leaves that we brought in were from last year. And we probably won't use them till the end of this year, and it will be used in like a model of continuing to break down. So I mean, there is concern about that, but I kind of have the perspective of like, that's in a confined area where the community gardeners are constantly interacting with their plots. So they have multiple ways and times of controlling the invasives.
We have a question from the Zoom people. Does the city of Wheat Ridge help fund irrigation, or do you have other practices such as passive irrigation?
At the community garden?
Correct.
Yes, the city of Wheat Ridge does fund the irrigation. Well, the gardeners pay a small rent for their plots, and most of that goes towards the water. But yeah, the city does provide the water. We would like to do some passive collection. Something I would like to do.
My question, regenerative agriculture. So take your Venn diagram and your own mind. How do you overlap the ideas of agroforestry and regenerative agriculture? How do you define that? And I have the same type of question from Susan with the urban community forestry and agroforestry, but how we fit those two together.
That's a really great question. I mean, I think the question was, how do agroforestry and agriculture and regenerative agriculture fit together? Well, my mind went right to that Venn diagram where they overlap, and like the food forest pops up right up. We have that as a demonstration right there. The really nice thing about that area is that it's in a community commons, and the traffic that is there is unreal. I mean, I probably talk to 15-20 people a day when I'm out there. So I think like having places where like it can be explored and understood, and then it can be maybe carried out, and people can understand how to implement more agroforestry into their plots of land. I think it's really interesting because I start talking with the forestry department about integrating more food into our forests, and immediately their brains kind of freeze up. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So I think that's why it's really important to have some of these demonstration zones out there, so that experience can be, I mean, like, it doesn't have to be apple tree and cottonwood tree next to each other. I mean, I think that's kind of like where the mind starts to break. So I think it's just like a really opportunity to explore, what does it mean? and how do we put these things together and how do we create more regenerative agriculture? Meaning, how are we using agriculture in a way that is in service towards life? Susan, do you have an
Is
answer?
there time for Susan now?
Susan, do you have an answer to that question?
Sure, should I stand up?
Yep.
Here? I also sort of see them as having a big overlap, but I guess when you think about agroforestry, like a food forest, those are pretty much all regenerative, tend to be mostly regenerative practices, but then you have like alley cropping where you're gonna have, the trees are permanent and I consider that regenerative, but the alleys might be have annual cropping. So it's kind of a mixture. I did want to say one thing though about food forests is that, and I meant to point this out during my presentation, most of the profiles that I wrote were basically some kind of food forest. If you wanted, they fell under that umbrella. And so I think in my next search for more examples, I'm going to be looking more for other forms of urban agroforestry. So if anybody has any ideas, let me know. But I think that is the agroforestry practice that seems to be just kind of happening more. You're seeing more of it in urban areas. And I think that's partly because there's more opportunity and just start with one tree and then maybe add some things around it. That's how some people start anyway. Yeah.
I appreciate in your presentation because you included farms that are doing medicinals and herbs and food for wildlife and how all those can fit in there. And it being in a very arid climate in Arizona, how do we do it on the most amount of water? And those
Yes.
types of things open up some opportunities that fruit tree may not.
Right. Yes, so Chris appreciated that in my presentation, I talked about herbal, I gave the examples included people growing herbals and medicinals and not just fruit trees. Although some of those arid, like the Arizona example, their main type of tree was a fruit tree, but they were looking for fruit trees that did well in low water situations. But then, the other thing that I thought was interesting is water management was an aspect of almost all the the urban examples I gave, either in dry land, trying to, manage for water retention. I have an example from the Keys where they're also wanting to spread water out across their little half-acre urban garden because they don't want too much in any one area. So water management, mulching to build soil and control invasives, really, really important. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have time for one more? I think you had a question back there. Or were you gonna?
I did,
Yeah.
for, wow. I wanted to know what the neighbors, that live right next to, like, the composting and like, how are they feeling about all this? Do they love it? Are they the volunteers, or is there like community outreach that you have to conduct to kind of connect them?
Great question. So Josie asked about the neighborhood. The neighbors that are directly next to where the composting is happening and the neighbors that were kind of along where the food forests are, if we conducted any community outreach and what is our experience with them. So it's been a bit of a journey. It was very interesting doing the community outreach. So in the picture, maybe you remember there's townhouses there. So those are new in the last 2 years. Brand new. So a lot of I would say many of the gardeners that we have now come from those townhouses. I would say there's maybe 5 gardeners, but it's enough that there's a bit of a relationship there. The people that are along the sidewalk where that abandoned right of way was, they were the very vocal ones about how upsetting it was to have those invasive weeds and nobody taking care of it. Then when we invited them to the community outreach, they were worried about people living in the forest. They were worried about where the food was going to go. They were also, what else were they worried about? Creighton was there, right?
they were worried about the trees blocking their view into the
School.
grass.
Yeah. They had a lot of concerns about how big the trees were gonna get, so. We had like coming out of that engagement moment, it was kind of like some. Do they want it or do they not want it? But like we were going ahead with it anyway, so it was kind of a weird community engagement, like we really wanted to get their feedback and like how could we create the design. That was happy towards them. So since that happened, like massive switch. After the meeting, I went around to every single one of them. I was like, so what's going on? Like, are you for this thing or not? And they were like, yeah, but we know we just have to poke holes in people's ideas. They had another concern about volunteers. They're like, this is just gonna go fallow. Nobody's gonna take care of it. And it's like, I don't know. There's more activation in that area now. Like people literally are out there every day checking on like either what they planted yesterday. Miranda, our tree steward, like so the city of Wheat Ridge does a really big plant giveaway. And every plant that was not given away, she put into the food forest. So we have like tomatoes and squash and cucumbers. And then the neighbors got that idea. So they had their leftover plants. So like we have like a very interesting mix of annuals and perennials and baby trees. So I think it's interesting in how community engagement goes. Like we had some really a lot of pushback. The neighbor right next to us also, so we haven't started doing any kind of food composting because I don't want to start something that can't be maintained. So I've been building like a bit of capacity with some of our gardeners that are really also interested in it. So now we've mobilized a compost committee. And we're getting ready to start working into that, but I think we all share the same vision that we want to make it work. So we're really being systematic about how we're gonna deploy that. We have been building a lot of capacity with our neighbor there. They love it. They have a kind of a very interesting house there, like a house next to a garden and a townhouse complex. So they get a lot of walkthrough and they weren't very excited about that. So we started working with them about how could we create some city paths or some walkthrough paths that would help to conduct the flow around their house. So they're really on board. She comes over and that whole area is really great for her. She's had a baby. She just walks the sidewalk. It's a really nice loop. With the trees changing all the time. So it, like I said, like it's just created this pocket of activation. Yeah. Question?
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have one more? I had one first reason. Is there any question? So the examples that you provided, interested in funding, grant opportunities, and what business structure looks like. Can you just be a person and get funding for your project, or do you have a nonprofit? What is the business structure like for they? Every nonprofit, they have little fees where they just.
No, yeah, so the question was, how did people get funding? Were they a nonprofit or just an individual person requesting funds? Most of them, if I look at the 7 case studies that I did, were individual people. So I featured 2 nonprofits here. Well, the Food Forest Cooperative, which by the way, was the second ever cooperative formed in the state of Arizona of any kind of cooperative. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. And of course, the Coastal Roots Farm, those were the 2 organizations, but everybody else was just an individual. So James was able to get funding just for his own personal, garden from Rural Action. Yeah, and of course, it's just individuals can apply for EQIP funding. Yeah. And I didn't really mention also, I pointed out one of the people had gotten funding from the Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP. That is another avenue to get funding, to get a financial assistance from NRCS. And I'm sure these 2 know a lot more about how to get it, but I'm understanding that some people get it for invasive weed control, invasive species control, for mulching. Maybe you can, there's a bunch of practices that can support what you're doing. So they're not necessarily an agroforestry practice, but can support your agroforestry or any other operation.
Well, thank you, everybody. I think adding that discussion at the end of these two presentations really added a lot of value and depth. So thanks again, ladies, for sharing your information and for everybody for engaging. It's break time now, and we have CEUs. Thank you. So these are the ASA. Those signature sheets are available after the end of each segment. So at breaks, and then the SAF and the ISA just later on in the day. So if you're looking for ASA credits, please
For ASA credits, come see me.
track down this gentleman in the back there. So
Don't forget, agroforestry starts with agriculture.
indeed, sweet. So,
The ISA is also right now.
oh, okay, ISA also right now. So ISA goes see Donna, ASA, see this gentleman in the back, and restroom here, outhouse outside. It's beautiful out, walk around, mingle with some peeps, and we'll be back in about 15 minutes.
So here's, I went.
Talking about the other land thing. I like what I got my finger on the.
You're right on.
Okay, but I said, so it actually.